Hello and welcome back. In this video we're going to continue our DB wrapper class, and the first thing that we need to do is figure out a way that we can query our database with raw queries and take advantage of PDO's wonderful binding and preparing of their statements to avoid SQL injections and things like that. So what we're going to do is, first of all, let's just get rid of where we're using that example connection to the database in our index file, and then close our index file. We're going to leave our DB class open, and then in our app, let's go ahead and open our controllers, and we'll open our home, and we'll just do some example work here in our index action. So when I tell you to refresh the page, just make sure you're in the home or root directory, and we're going to work in our index here. None of this code will be the final code or anything like that, but we are going to be testing our DB wrapper as we build it. So the first thing that I want to do is let's build our query method. So we have our instance now, and now let's just get into some of our functionality that our DB wrapper will need. So we can do a public function query. Okay, and the query is going to take two parameters, and we're going to pass it in an SQL statement. Okay, so that'll be a string, and then we're also going to pass in a second parameter that I'm just going to call params. Now params is going to be an array, and we don't have to pass a second parameter, so we're going to set by default an empty array to params. So what we absolutely need is this first parameter here. And so the first thing I want to do here is we have this error that's set to false. Now with us using a singleton pattern, we could have run a query once before, and that error may be set to true, or there could be some other information. So what I want to do is just kind of reset that every time we call this query method. So we're going to say this error is false. Okay, so now when we call this query method, it's going to always, first thing it's going to do is set that error to false. What I want to do is set up an if statement, and what we're going to do is say if this query, and at the same time we're checking this, we're going to go ahead and set this query equal to our prepared statement. So we'll say this PDO. Now remember, PDO is our connection, so that is our actual, it's not our connection, it is our PDO object. So we have this underscore PDO, and that'll be available to us because we've instantiated or gotten our instance. So this PDO, and then we're going to say prepare, which is a method that's given to us through the PDO extension, and we're going to prepare the SQL statement. So we're just going to pass that in. So if this SQL exists and if this prepare is successful, it's going to prepare the statement and set query equal to that prepared statement. If that happens, then what I want to do is set up a counter that we can use. So say x equals 1, and then what we're going to work on now is binding our parameter, or binding our values to our SQL statement. If you don't understand what that is, don't worry about it. We're going to do it a ton. We're going to do that so much in this application that you'll understand it by the time we're done. But we need to build this ahead of time so that we can use it. So what we're going to say is if count params. Okay, so if there are params here, it's not just an empty array. So if count params, then what we want to do is we're going to do a for each loop. So we'll say for each params as param. Okay, and then we're going to do this. Grab that query again, and we'll run another method called bind value. And we don't have to write that, it's given to us with the PDO extension. And what we're going to bind there is we're going to tell it what value we're binding. So you start with 1, so that's why we set this counter of x. So the first time that runs, that will be 1. and then we're going to pass it in param, and that will bind that to the first basically question mark that we have in our SQL statement. And then what we want to do in that for each loop is we're just going to say x plus plus, which will increment that by 1. And the next time it runs, if there are 2 parameters, x will equal 2, and then it'll bind the second parameter with that. So that will do all the binding for us, and that's wonderful. So like once we're done with the binding now, then it's time to actually execute the query. So let's just go ahead and wrap that in another if statement, and we'll say this, if this query execute. So that will execute the query. So if that successfully executes, then what we're going to do is we're going to set up all of our stuff. So we're going to say this results is equal to this query, and then we'll use the fetch all. Fetch all, and then we would pass it in fetch, and we're going to, since we're using object-oriented programming, let's just go ahead and fetch this as an object. Okay. Just go ahead and complete it. And then what we can do is say this count is equal to this query row count. And then let's go ahead and set this last insert ID equal to. Now we won't use query on this because the way this actually works is you need to grab the PDO object and not the query. So if there's an inserted, if we use this query statement to insert something, we'll set that last insert ID here so that we have access to that later. So if that happens, great. If not, then what we want to do is say else this error is true. Okay. After this if statement for the prepare, we're just going to go ahead and return this. Okay. So what's going to happen is we would use the query method to fire off a SQL query, and it will actually set up all of these for us. We'll have the PDO object already, we'll have the instance already, then query will be prepared and set here, and then if the query will bind any values that we want to bind with the second parameter, or we'll skip over that, or we will bind, and then we will execute the query. Once the execute query happens, then we're going to set our results, and that is singular, I just noticed, so we'll just call it result. So this result is equal to our fetch all, and that will be a PDO object. Okay, and then we're also going to throw in count and our last insert ID that we can use later on with other methods. Okay, so let's just kind of test this out really quickly and make sure that it's working. So back to our browser, and we'll jump into our PHP MyAdmin, and let's go to our contacts table, and we'll click on insert, and just go ahead and insert a contact for you, maybe yourself or something like that. Just going to throw in a few of these. Okay. So if we enter to Main Street, Washington, Missouri, United States. And for user ID, for now I'm just going to put 1. Hit go. So I've inserted that row here. You could have done it with our query method, but before we get too complex here, I just want to go ahead and make sure that we're working correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into our home, and remember how I said we're going to do this with our index action here. And so what I'm going to do is say db equals Remember, we're going to say db get instance. Right? And then what I want to do is, now that we have db get instance, let's just try this. Let's set up an SQL statement. We'll say select all from contacts. That's good enough for now. Select all from contacts. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and do our db. We'll say contacts equals. Actually, we'll do contacts. Contacts Q equals db try our query method, and we'll pass it in SQL. And then let's just dump and die contacts Q. Oops. Alright, so if we go back here and refresh, you can see we have our database object here, and our result. If you look at our result here, we actually have an array with one object in the array, and that object is our database return. So we can see the information that I entered in the database. So that's working correctly. You can also see that count was set to 1, that's correct. And we didn't insert anything, so this last insert ID is 0. So far so good. Our query method's working. Excuse me. And so now that we've got the query method working, and I'm going to go ahead and stop the video, and in the next video we are going to move on with our DB wrapper class. So I hope you've enjoyed this so far. See you in the next video.